You've been eating them your whole life. Your parents ate them. Your doctor probably eats them. And nobody, not once, told you what they were quietly doing to the inside of your body every single day. Until now. What I'm about to walk you through in the next few minutes is something I've spent over 2 decades trying to get people to understand. Not in a textbook, not in a medical journal, in plain language. Because by the time most people sit across from me in my office, the damage is already well underway, and they had no idea. None. They were doing what they thought was right. That's the part that still gets me. After 23 years of practicing gastroenterology, that's the part I haven't gotten used to.
My name is Dr. Shigeaki Hinohara. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and gut health specialist. I've been practicing clinical medicine for 23 years. The last 14 of them focused almost entirely on chronic digestive disorders, colon dysfunction, and what I now call silent gut failure, a pattern I see in my clinic every single week. I started making these videos because of a patient. I'll tell you about him in a moment. But first, I need you to understand what's actually happening inside your body right now. Because most of what you've been told about digestive health is, at best, incomplete. At worst, it's been steering you directly toward the problem. Let me tell you about a man named Gerald. Gerald was 54 years old when he came to see me. He was a project manager, worked long hours, ate what he described as a pretty normal diet. He wasn't overweight. He exercised on weekends. He took a multivitamin. By every surface measure, Gerald was a reasonably healthy, middle-aged man. But Gerald had been living with chronic constipation for almost 11 years. 11 years of bloating so severe his wife thought he looked pregnant by evening. 11 years of that deep, dull ache that settles just below the navel, not sharp enough to send you to the hospital, just constant enough to wear you down. He'd seen 2 other doctors. Both told him to drink more water and eat more fiber. When I looked at Gerald's diet, really looked at it, 3 things jumped out immediately. The same 3 things I see in almost every patient like him. And here's what broke my heart a little. Gerald wasn't eating badly by conventional standards. He was eating the foods he'd been told were fine. He was following the advice. He was doing what most people do. And that, more than anything, is why I want you to hear this. Before I get into the 3 foods, I want you to understand something about your colon, because the word cementing in the title isn't an exaggeration. It's actually one of the most accurate descriptions I know. Think of your colon as a long, muscular tube, about 5 feet long, whose entire job is to move waste through your body in a coordinated rhythmic wave. Gastroenterologists call this peristalsis. The colon contracts and relaxes in a sequence, like squeezing a toothpaste tube from the bottom up. When that system works properly, you barely notice it. When it doesn't, when something begins to slow those contractions, thicken the contents, and coat the inner lining, waste starts to accumulate in ways your body was never designed to handle. The scientific term is colonic dysmotility. But I always explain it to patients this way. Imagine trying to push wet cement through a garden hose. Now imagine that hose is 5 feet long, has dozens of bends and curves, and the cement is getting thicker every hour. That's what certain foods do to your colon over time. Not overnight, not dramatically, slowly, consistently, invisibly. A study published in the American Journal of Gastroenterology found that approximately 16% of the general adult population suffers from chronic constipation, but that number jumps to over 33% in adults over 60. That's 1 in 3 people over the age of 60 living with a colon that is, to varying degrees, failing to do its job. And chronic constipation isn't just uncomfortable. Research from the NIH has directly linked long-term colonic dysfunction to increased risk of colorectal cancer, diverticular disease, hemorrhoids, and even systemic inflammation that affects organs far beyond the gut. This is not a minor inconvenience. This is a systemic problem, and it starts at the table. So let's talk about the first food. And I want you to genuinely think about whether this is on your plate right now, because statistically there's a very good chance it is. The first food is white bread, and everything made from refined white flour. I know, You've heard this before. You've probably nodded along to this advice 100 times and then had toast for breakfast anyway. I'm not judging, I'm explaining. Because I don't think most people understand the mechanism. They know refined flour is bad. They don't know what it actually does inside the colon. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Here's the assumption most people carry. White bread is fine in moderation. It's just carbs. It gives you energy. It's not like you're eating junk food. Here's what's actually happening. When wheat is refined into white flour, the bran and the germ, the two components that contain virtually all of the fiber, minerals, and motility-supporting nutrients, are stripped away. What remains is almost pure starch, and when that starch hits your digestive system, it does something very specific. It absorbs water, aggressively. It pulls moisture from the contents of your intestine and from the intestinal wall itself, transforming the material moving through your colon from a soft, pliable mass into something much denser and harder to move. I always explain it to patients this way. Think of refined white flour like dry papier-mâché paste. When it's wet, it moves. When it dries out, it sets. And in a colon that's already slow, already dealing with a sluggish motility pattern, that paste doesn't just slow things down. It begins to accumulate in the haustra, the small pouches along the colon wall, and over time, layers build on layers. A landmark study in the journal Gut, one of the most respected gastroenterology journals in the world, tracked over 10,000 adults and found a direct dose-dependent relationship between refined carbohydrate consumption and transit time. Every additional serving of refined grain per day increased average colonic transit time by a measurable increment. Transit time is how long it takes food to move from your mouth to elimination. A healthy transit time is between 24 and 48 hours. Many of my patients come in with transit times of 72, 96, sometimes over 100 hours. That's waste sitting inside the body for 4 days. Let that sit for a moment. 4 days. And every meal containing white bread, white pasta, white rice, crackers, pastry, or standard commercial baked goods adds to that accumulation. Now here's the practical part, and I want to give you something actionable with every single point today, not just a warning to walk away worried. The goal is not perfection, the goal is substitution. If you are eating white bread daily, switching to a genuine whole grain bread, one where the first ingredient is whole wheat flour or whole grain flour, not enriched wheat flour, restores a meaningful amount of the fiber your colon depends on to generate peristaltic contractions. Specifically, soluble fiber from whole grains feeds the gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, and those short-chain fatty acids are one of the primary signals your colon uses to trigger movement. The Mayo Clinic recommends 25 to 38 grams of fiber per day for adults. The average American gets about 15. That gap, that 10 to 23 gram deficit, is partly filled every single day with refined white flour. Every slice of white toast, every bowl of white pasta, every dinner roll is a missed opportunity. Not a sin, a missed opportunity. Before you dismiss this as something you've already heard, I want you to stay with me. Because the second food is one that almost nobody suspects. In 23 years, I have never once had a patient volunteer it when I ask them what they think might be slowing their gut down. The second food is dairy, specifically processed and high-fat dairy consumed in significant daily quantities. And I want to be precise here because this is one of the most nuanced conversations in gut health, and I don't want to be reductive. The assumption people carry is this: dairy is neutral, milk is healthy, cheese is just food. Maybe yogurt even helps, probiotics and all that. Here's what the research actually shows. Dairy doesn't affect everyone the same way, but a significant portion of the population, much larger than most people realize, experiences a specific physiological response to the proteins and fats in processed dairy that directly slows colonic motility. A study published in the Journal of Pediatric Gastroenterology and Nutrition, and later confirmed in adult populations, found that removing cow's milk from the diets of chronically constipated patients resulted in resolution of constipation in over 68% of cases. 68%. That's not a minor statistical signal. That's a majority response. Here's the mechanism. Casein, the primary protein in cow's milk, is a slow-digesting, structurally dense protein. Think of it this way. I always describe casein to patients as nature's slow-release glue. It was designed to sustain a calf for hours between feedings. In your gut, particularly in large amounts, it can form a semi-solid curd that moves through the intestinal tract considerably more slowly than other food components. In patients who are already dealing with sluggish motility, this slowing effect compounds. Layer in the high-fat content of full-fat cheese, butter, and processed dairy products. Fat delays gastric emptying, meaning everything sits in the stomach longer before it even reaches the small intestine, and you have a combination that is, for many people, profoundly constipating. And processed dairy doubles down on this. When cheese is processed, when it's melted, reformed, extruded, or combined with additives to create the kind of cheese that comes individually wrapped in plastic, the natural bacterial cultures that were present in the original fermentation process are largely destroyed. What remains is the casein and fat without any of the probiotic benefit. It's the worst of both worlds. Think of it like a slow-moving river. Your gut, when healthy, is a flowing current. Add casein and high-fat content without any of the microbiome support that traditional fermentation provides, and you're essentially dumping sandbags into the river. The current slows. Things start to back up. I want to be clear, I'm not telling you to eliminate dairy entirely. What the research supports is this. If you are chronically constipated and you are consuming significant daily amounts of processed dairy, this is one of the first levers worth examining. Traditional fermented dairy, real yogurt with live cultures, kefir, aged hard cheeses, behaves differently in the gut and often supports rather than hinders motility. It's the processed, pasteurized, reformulated versions that pose the greatest risk for colonic slowdown. The practical action here. For 2 weeks, track your dairy intake. Not to eliminate it, to understand it. Note when you have processed cheese, when you have milk, when you have butter. And note how your gut responds in the 24 to 48 hours that follow. The connection, once you start looking for it, often becomes unmistakably clear. I want to pause here for a moment and ask you something genuine. Has any of this sounded familiar so far? The bloating by evening, the heaviness, the feeling that things are just not moving the way they should. If this is your experience right now, I want you to type yes in the comments. Not because I need the engagement, because I genuinely want to know how many of you have been living with this quietly, thinking it was just the way your body works. It isn't. It is not just the way your body works. And the next food I'm going to talk about is the one that, in my clinical experience, is the most surprising to people and the most damaging of the three. The third food. This is the one I wish I could have reached people with sooner. This next one is the one I never see in patient brochures, the one that almost never comes up in the 30-second conversations most doctors have about digestive health. And in some ways, it's the most insidious of the three, because it's been marketed to you as something healthy, as something natural, as something your body needs. I'm talking about certain red meats, specifically processed red meat and fatty, low-fiber red meat eaten in high frequency without adequate fiber counterbalance. Before I hear the pushback, stay with me, because this is not an anti-meat argument. This is a physiology argument. The assumption is straightforward. Meat is protein. Protein is essential. Protein digests fine and exits the body cleanly. Some people even believe meat is easy on the gut. Here is what your colon is actually experiencing. Red meat, particularly processed red meats like sausage, salami, hot dogs, deli meats, and commercially produced ground beef products, contains virtually zero dietary fiber. None. And unlike plant-based proteins that carry fermentable substrates into the colon, the residue from red meat digestion arrives in the large intestine as a dense, nitrogen-rich byproduct that is particularly challenging for the colonic environment to process efficiently. Here's what makes this genuinely concerning. When red meat is processed, cured, smoked, or preserved with nitrates and nitrites, the chemical byproducts of those preservation processes generate compounds called N-nitroso compounds during digestion. The World Health Organization classified processed red meat as a Group 1 carcinogen in 2015, meaning there is sufficient evidence linking it to colorectal cancer. Not probable. Sufficient. The same classification category as tobacco smoke in relation to lung cancer. But here's what doesn't make the headlines as often. Beyond the cancer risk, the fermentation of undigested red meat protein in the colon, what microbiologists call putrefaction, produces hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and other toxic byproducts that are directly harmful to the colonocytes, the cells lining your colon wall. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that high red meat consumption was associated with measurable damage to the colonic mucosal barrier, the protective lining that keeps the contents of your colon separated from your bloodstream. Think of your colon lining like a freshly painted wall, clean, sealed, protective. Now take sandpaper to it every day, not deeply, just lightly, consistently, over months and years. That's what the hydrogen sulfide and ammonia produced by putrefying meat protein do to the colonocyte layer. And a damaged mucosal barrier isn't just a constipation problem. It's the beginning of something called intestinal hyperpermeability, what many clinicians now refer to as leaky gut, a condition the NIH has linked to systemic inflammation, autoimmune conditions, and accelerated progression of existing gut diseases. And when you combine this, the colonic damage from processed red meat, with the slowed transit time from refined flour and the motility suppressing effect of processed dairy, you begin to understand why so many people are walking around with guts that are, in the most literal sense, beginning to fail them. This is where it gets serious, and I need you to hear this clearly. Gerald, the patient I told you about at the very beginning of this video, when I looked at his 3-day diet recall, all 3 of these foods were present in significant quantities at almost every meal. White toast in the morning, processed cheese and deli meat at lunch, white pasta with a side of ground beef for dinner, every day, for years. He wasn't eating this way carelessly. He was eating this way because nobody had ever told him otherwise. Nobody had ever connected the dots for him. When we removed all 3 foods, not permanently, but systematically, one at a time with substitutions, his transit time went from 96 hours to 38 hours in 6 weeks. His bloating resolved. The ache beneath his navel that he'd lived with for 11 years, gone. Not reduced. Gone. He sat across from me at his follow-up appointment and said something I've thought about dozens of times since. He said, "I just wish I'd known this 10 years ago." And that's the part I carry with me into every one of these videos. The quiet weight of time lost to something that was fixable, the meals that could have been different if someone had said something sooner. That's not guilt. It's not meant to be. But it is real. And it's why this conversation matters. Let me bring this together for you now. Because information without action is just noise. Here is what I want you to do tonight. Not next week. Tonight. Look at what you had today. Not to punish yourself, to understand. Did refined white flour show up at breakfast? Did processed dairy appear at lunch? Was there processed red meat at dinner? If the answer to even one of those is yes, you now know something you didn't know this morning. The practical path forward is not radical elimination. It is strategic substitution. Replace white bread with genuine whole grain. When you buy bread, turn it over. If the first ingredient isn't whole grain or whole wheat flour, it's still refined. Replace processed dairy with traditionally fermented alternatives where you can real yogurt, kefir, aged natural cheeses, and reduce, not eliminate, but reduce, your processed red meat intake, replacing it 2 or 3 times per week with plant-based proteins, fish, or lean poultry. The American Gastroenterological Association recommends a minimum of 25 grams of fiber daily as one of the most powerful evidence-based interventions for colonic health. That's achievable through food. But it requires that the foods displacing your fiber intake, the white flour, the processed dairy, the processed meat, Begin to take up less room on your plate. Drink water. I know everyone says it, but hydration is the one factor that makes every other intervention more effective. Your colon needs water to maintain the fluid content of fecal material. Without adequate hydration, even high-fiber intake can make constipation worse. 6 to 8 glasses of water per day is not a suggestion. It's the baseline your colon needs to function and move. Even a 20-minute walk after dinner activates the gastrocolic reflex, a neurological signal from movement that triggers peristaltic activity. Research published in Alimentary Pharmacology and Therapeutics found that regular moderate exercise reduced transit time by an average of 12 hours. 12 hours, just from walking. Before I close, I want to say something that isn't medical advice. It's just something true. Most people who struggle with chronic gut problems have been struggling quietly, for years sometimes. They've learned to live around it, wearing looser clothes by evening, skipping social situations when the bloating is bad, normalizing a constant low-grade discomfort they've come to accept as just their reality. It doesn't have to be. The information exists, the evidence is there. What's been missing for a lot of people is someone taking the time to explain it in a way that actually connects to their real daily life, not a pamphlet, not a checkbox on an annual physical, a real conversation. That's what I hope this was. If you made it this far, please share this video with someone in your life who has been dealing with this quietly. Not because I need the views, because there are people watching this right now who needed to hear it, and there are people who won't watch it until someone they trust sends it to them. You might be giving someone something they didn't know they needed, and if you have questions, leave them in the comments. I read them. I respond when I can. Because this conversation doesn't end when the video does. Take care of your gut. It is doing far more for you than you realize, and it's asking for far less than you think. Just give it better material to work with. Start tonight.